Well,
Yeah.
Joe, yeah.
What's going on?
Well, the democracy was on the ballot,
Who's?
and democracy won.
Yes.
It's been a great week.
Yeah. Great
For
week
democracy.
for democracy. Yeah. Who's the new governor of Nevada?
I don't know. To
You
be
haven't
honest,
keeping up with that?
nah.
You don't care about Nevada?
No, I was following it closely, the whole thing, for the first day.
Mm.
Once we went into day two, I was like, I know what's going to happen from here on out.
The general
And
trend,
my
yeah.
prediction was correct. We're on day 5, and the head of Electoral Commission in Arizona is telling people that we might have the results in by next week. I'm not sure. Then the reporter said, well, can I get you to commit to a day, Monday or Tuesday? And he said, oh, my God. You know how these things go?
Yeah.
No. So, no, I haven't. What's happening in Nevada?
American elections are far more interesting than anybody else's elections. Do you
Definitely,
notice
yeah.
that?
Definitely.
Although we're talking from the point of view of the English-speaking world here, right? I mean, we don't know how excited people in non-English-speaking countries are about the American elections.
Well, on that, a French
The average
French government minister yesterday complained gently that the point she was making was actually generally geopolitical. France and EU ought to maybe, become a bit more autonomous in the world. And the example she gave was the inordinate amount of media time French media were giving to following the ins and outs of the American election.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. It's still a parochial issue, but it is very much. They do seem to increasingly grip the wider Western world. But
Yeah.
and it's partly because it's no longer election day, is it? It's election week.
Right.
Which apparently is normal. I remember they told us, and now, of course, in 2020, the reason for that was, COVID. Jeez, I mean, come on. They can't expect us to count COVID, right? Well, what's the excuse now? You asked me, what are places like Maricopa County officials saying for the reason? I couldn't find a single one. They don't give one. It's just a new normal. It's just like, what do you mean? The
happens?
wallpaper's always been that color. What? I couldn't find one.
Anyway, the new Nevada governor is a guy called Joe Lombardo. Do you know who that is?
Oh my God, Joe Lombardo.
Formerly known as Sheriff Lombardo.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Fair play to him.
Just goes to show, if you keep your head down and play ball with the feds, you will be
Promoted.
negative selection, right?
Right.
You'll go up. You'll go far in the world, young man.
Just for people who don't know, Joe Lombardo was the sheriff who was on point dealing with the Las Vegas shooting. How many years ago? 3? 2019, right?
17.
2017?
Yeah.
Oh my God, how time flies. 5 years ago, wow. The shooting at the concert in Las Vegas in 2017. Had a lot of anomalies about it, and, not least of which was that scary FBI dude standing behind Sheriff Joe Lombardo and all the press conferences that Sheriff Joe Lombardo gave. The FBI were all over that, like up the wazoo, telling, making sure that he said all the right things.
Yeah, he changed his tone after the first few days.
Yeah.
Took back a few things he had initially said about how they had, quote, stormed the hotel room and stuff like that.
Right.
That's interesting.
Well, I mean, you can understand
in a creepy American way. It's uniquely American.
It's uniquely American. You'd probably see it as him riding on those on the wave, let's say, a 5-year-long wave of although he's been probably campaigning for a couple of years now, of his stellar handling of that situation, right? I mean, you can imagine someone like that in that situation, such a high-profile case that was going on for quite a long time. Blah blah. He's in the media. He's in the
known
news.
quantity, I suppose.
So he's known quantity, and all the people know him as well, right? So to the extent that it was a legitimate election, people thought, well, he handled the situation in Las Vegas or at the shooting very well, so he's the man to be in the governor's mansion.
Except he didn't. There's officially still no motive.
Right.
The last one they came up with was, what we did was we did an autopsy on his brain, and we think we may have found some evidence for the defects in his brain. It was such a freaky kind of bookend to that whole investigation.
Mm-hmm.
The brain of the alleged sole gunman. God, I've forgotten his name. It's funny how he's forgotten, but Lombardo's now the governor.
Yeah.
He's the governor, you say, of the whole state of Nevada.
Yep. More or less. What was his name? Something in with P. Can't remember. The shooter. He's just a footnote in history. Yeah. So, elections. What do you think about the elections? Well, it's a bit of a shit show.
It's
Bit of a joke.
Just as I put red wave in the title last week. In full disclosure, I put it in as clickbait because honestly, when we talked about it, we didn't really think there was going to be a red wave. We thought all things being equal, there ought to be, but all things aren't equal, so there wasn't. And like I said, beginning once it was going to day 2 and 3, it's like, okay, no. I think Blake Masters is now officially out of the running, officially, whatever that even means. The gulf, the gap between him and the incumbent, is too big now.
20th, control of the Senate. So the Dems have control of the Senate after the best midterm results for a sitting party in 20 years. How'd you like them apples? Was this the right time? Like, was Joe
1986,
Biden?
yeah. And that was a Reagan time.
Yeah. Was Joe Biden the right guy and this administration and the current state of America and the current issues, or to whatever extent America has issues, the current problems, social problems, international problems, Joe Biden, the Biden administration, how they're doing, Joe Biden, how he appears, all that kind of stuff, Congress, wokeism, left versus right, all that kind of stuff. Was this the right, after 2 years of the Biden administration, is it understandable, appropriate, likely, or even appropriate? Yeah.
No.
That they would have the best midterm results for a sitting party
since 1986.
Yeah.
No, you're being asked to believe it's on a par with Ronald Reagan's first term being successful enough and pulling in new voters from the Democrats for the Republicans to win in 1986 midterms. That's what you're being asked to believe. It's on a par.
Yeah.
That most Americans believe the country is going in the right direction.
I think 20 years would be 2002.
1980. Why did I think I read separately? Maybe you have a different year. That's in my mind because I read that it's been the best.
What would have been Bush
success for an incumbent party holding the presidency since '86. But
well, that was just a headline.
I don't think they know yet because the numbers aren't all.
Yeah, but it is.
The numbers, the facts haven't been. No, did I say that? They haven't finished counting.
Right.
That's the official.
Most
they haven't finished counting. So not all the votes are counted yet. For example, I told you during the week that I was stunned that to discover, turns out it was actually a prediction by a kind of an independent polling company called Echelon Insights. They forecast before this that these midterms would receive the highest ever number of eligible voters voting for midterm at 125 million. That's out of an electorate of 133 million, so it's huge, It's not going to be that high, but it's still a 50-year, something like a 50-year high. I think the only exception to that is actually the last midterms, the 2018 midterms. Again, they haven't finished counting, so I can't actually confirm that, but it's going to be up there. So there's another premise we're being asked to believe here. 2016, Donald Trump's elected. All three of these subsequent elections in the United States pulled out more people than the previous equilibrium, the apathetic decades, let's say. It drew them out to engage politically for one overriding purpose, to defeat Donald Trump and anything smacking of what he believes in, any candidates he's endorsed, et cetera, et cetera. That's another premise that you're being asked to buy here. The last three elections have engaged Americans like never before, like since 1900 or something like that, for one overriding purpose, to get Trump. Well, all the media hates him, so maybe everyone believes the media. Except, again, immediate contrasting facts, also basically democracy-based in the form of regular fairly reliable. I don't know how reliable.
Yeah,
polls
there's-
which show that the media is the least trusted
Yeah.
institution in the
Yeah,
United
yeah.
States.
There's some things that don't square with the narrative. Basically, the attacks on Trump, the demonization of Trump, the entire system and the media, Washington establishment, and the media rounding on Trump over the past, really since 2016, right? So for the past 6 years, it's been pretty much incessant demonization of Trump and stuff. If Trump doesn't represent, or at least in potential, represent a majority of the population, and therefore would be able to, gain power and hold on to power, and people like him would be able to get into power, why is he such a problem? Why do they do that? Why do they go after him so much if he doesn't represent, at least in potential, if not right now, and certainly in 2016 he did, and maybe in 2020, who knows, but certainly in terms of the electorate, the majority of the people who are going to vote, that he represents them and they would vote for him. The only explanation for why they go after him to this extent is that he's a clear and present danger, and that implies that a majority of the electorate would vote for him. Of course, they didn't officially in 2020, and in these midterms they didn't as well, because his candidates that he backed, most of them actually didn't win. So this was seen as a commentary on Trump, right? But again, that's another attack on Trump. It's an attempt to get rid of Trump, to sideline him, to get him out of the way, especially for 2024 and that kind of stuff. So the guy is clearly seen, has been for, like I said, since 2016, seen as a major, major threat to the establishment at the ballot box. So I think it's fair to say that Trump has, and Trumpian politics is favoured by a majority of the American electorate, regardless of election results, right? I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw based on the way that they have approached him. They saw him as a very serious threat. If he was a minor threat, they wouldn't have to worry about him. If he was so self-evidently a Neanderthal and fascist, sexist, evil, despicable person, you wouldn't have to try too hard, but they tried very, very hard. Now that then pushes the problem further along the line of, okay, so let's say that is, okay, they have their opinion of him, the establishment and the media have their opinion of him, but they realize that actually he's gaining a lot of traction among the population. So then the problem becomes the population. So yes, Trump represents, and Trumpian politics, Trumpian viewpoints represent the majority of the American electorate. But that's a problem as well that we have to do something about, because it's fascist, it's evil, it's all those things that they say it is, and therefore, really, at this point, democracy has to be
managed
a little bit here. In the same way, like, for example, if Hitler, if you could go back to 1930s Germany, surely any rational, sane person would not have been too nitpicky about the principles of democracy, or such as they existed at the time or whatever, and done whatever was necessary to make sure that Hitler didn't come to power. Therefore, it's morally justified, right? So it's morally justified to water down the democratic principles, water down the democratic process in the interest of the greater good, to stop someone evil like Trump getting into power.
Yeah.
That's where I'm coming from, Neil, and I'm sticking to it. That's my perspective.
Now,
I've gone woke, and that's it. But I think that's actually true. I think that's how they actually see it. I think that's how a lot of them see it.
Yes, in their private cliques, in their reels, but
Well, even
we should articulate the public mainstream counter to what you just said, which is, hang on a second. The polls, the results of the last 3 elections show that the majority of Americans do not support Trump. Biden won 81 million votes. That's what they say, right? And here, Biden has done really well. Not bad. He's very happy with the results. We should state that as far as they're concerned, because anything suggesting other than that is that, hang on, this is misinformation. You're claiming that millions of those votes are not real for the Democrats and Biden in particular.
Is it? Tell me, the whole medical misinformation thing that was a problem for us over the past couple of years, especially talking about the COVID situation. Is there political misinformation?
100%.
No. I know there is, but is it as serious? Because I can understand the narrative of medical misinformation being a threat, actual danger to the lives of some people. where someone would hear, if a lot of people were saying, drink bleach, for example, then you would be not allowed to say that publicly or say it on platforms, social media platforms, because it could negatively affect individual people who are foolish enough to take such a thing on board. But how does that work for political misinformation, and specifically in terms of questioning the validity of? I'm not saying that I'm questioning it. I'm just saying in the situation where someone would be questioning the validity of the American election results or the electoral process. How is that? Is that in the same category as medical misinformation? Like in terms of the narrative that it actually has a direct, you know what I mean? Would that not be more like protected free speech because it's not actually hurting anyone? It's only hurting, quote unquote, our democracy. But that democracy isn't a person, right? So
the Associated Press put out a report on November 3rd, so the week before the midterms. Misinformation in the midterm elections, what to expect. Misinformation is going to be central to this midterm election and central to the 2024 election. The single galvanizing narrative is that the 2020 election was stolen. It goes on to list misleading claims about voting, political misinformation. I was quoting someone they were citing just there, but now this is just the AP, straightforwardly reporting the facts, the objective facts. Political misinformation often focuses on immigration, crime, public health, geopolitics, disasters, education, or mass shooting. This year is mostly about voting. Yes, they're going with the health of the nation.
But there's no injured
democracy
party
being at stake when anything less than a basic acceptance that things happened more or less, that the result is more or less a reflection of the reality of the political preferences of the population. Anything that there might be individual, and they do accept. Of course, there are always, like in 2020, they said there are always things that go wrong, but it doesn't sway the overall result. Of course not. So anything that suggests that the overall result is bent enough that, for example, one party did or did not win a majority in the House, or that one person should or should not be the president in the White House. That is, as far as they're concerned.
I suppose you could stretch it to, spreading that kind of information, those kind of claims that the electoral process is broken, the vote was rigged in some way or other, etc., could lead to social unrest, which would then indirectly, so saying that could indirectly lead to people being injured or being hurt. It's all about hurt and harm, right? It's all about protecting individuals, right? At least that's how I understand it. The whole thing, the social media platforms are about no harm to individuals. Stuff that can be quite clearly directly or indirectly linked to harm to individuals. That kind of speech shouldn't be allowed, and in fact, no, even free speech advocates wouldn't. They're not absolutist in that sense. They wouldn't say that you should be allowed to say things like that can quite easily or directly or indirectly cause harm to individuals. So, but you start to stretch it quite far. You know what I mean? Where not only that, but you start to. There's no way to avoid clamping down on free discourse, and this obviously is something that people have been concerned about over the past few years with this progress towards more and more censorship and cancelling and all that kind of stuff, that it stops. It doesn't just get rid of those people who would be out to, who would be saying flagrantly false things that actually might harm some individuals, but you're lumping a lot of other people into it who are just expressing an opinion.
Well, it decimated the ranks of licensed medical professionals and scientists. Decimated. Peter McCulloch is out of a job. The most cited medical MD in the United States of America. Yeah. He's cancelled.
Yeah, and the truth obviously is a casualty of all that as well.
How many people are harmed by that?
Yeah. Well, of course, yeah. Yeah, and ultimately the problem is that the truth is a casualty of this. The truth falls, sometimes, you have to start to assume by design that truthful speech gets lumped in with disinformation. And because, anything that's counter-narrative basically is misinformation, counter-official narrative is disinformation. But what if there actually is some truth in there? People get things wrong all the time. So it's a very messy thing, and you do the only way to avoid the possibility that you could be censoring the truth that might be actually harmful in itself, because obviously, well, it is harmful in itself to censor the truth over a long period of time. The only way you can do that is to allow a reasonably large amount of speech and free speech, and you have to take the good with the bad. This move to kind of clean and sanitize the whole thing down to only what we say is true, you're going to do more harm than good. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, and I can't understand how people who have opinions on this, like especially on the side of censoring speech, don't see that. You know what I mean? That they would believe themselves to be advocates for the truth, but how can they not see that there is going to be a lot of cases where truth is sacrificed while you're trying to preserve the truth? So that's just my complaint about it. But it's fairly basic. It's fairly obvious. What annoys me about it is it's very obvious. It's a very obvious thing to come to it's a very obvious conclusion to draw. It's an easy conclusion to draw, and it's not wrong. It checks out. It's logical. But they go ahead anyway. So yeah, censoring, we're not allowed. So basically the point is we're not allowed to talk about anything that would suggest that there's anything wrong with these midterm electoral results. Certainly in 2020, it's very clear you're not allowed to talk about that. But these midterm, it extends to the midterms. We're not allowed to talk about anything that just seems off, seems wrong. Like we started the show with saying, like, wow, that's weird. The best results for a sitting administration, sitting government in 20 years. And then you look at the Biden and you say, that doesn't fit with the way people have expressed themselves over the past decades.
The polls this year, is, and there's various ones in the United States, Gallup, Pew, etc., YouGov, etc. Is the Biden? Are you happy with the direction the country is taking under Biden?
Right.
It's like 75% of people. No,
they're not the ones who voted though. They mustn't have voted. The people. Yeah, 75% of voters, by one poll, said that the country is on the wrong track, and the majority are angry about inflation and the economy. That's usually a death knell for the sitting administration in the midterms. Yeah. And yet they did really, really well against the odds. They held the Senate, and the Republicans are only gonna have, a relatively small majority in Congress. It's not a way of, by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a landslide. It's something like, I don't know what it'll turn out to be, but it's like CNN or right now they're showing 211 to 204, and there's still a bunch. Still about 10 or something like that to come in. Could end up being like 212 to, or whatever the numbers are. They could have a majority of 2 in Congress and not a majority in the Senate.
Yeah, that's
a win, like, for the Democrats. The Democrats won basically in these midterm elections against all the odds. So it's that kind of thing. We go, wow, that's weird. Nobody expected it. And polls were showing, like over the past week, polls showing this, like independent polls and even lefty polls, like left outlets, left media outlets showing based on their polls and on their estimation that it was going to be, bad news for the Dems. And then, didn't happen. Why? We don't have an answer. Don't know. It just happened. There isn't really a rational reason why this happened at all. Yeah. We can't understand it. It's amazing. Thank God.
Yeah.
Was the vote rigged? No, it wasn't.
No.
Not allowed to say that. And we know we're not allowed to say that. And this is we're on YouTube right now anyway. We're not allowed to say that on YouTube. And we didn't say it. I didn't say that. I was just saying what other people have said. I haven't actually advocated. I'm not saying that myself. I'm just saying this is what some people have said and how other people say, no, that's not what happened. Despite the fact that there is a big anomaly about these results. At least everybody recognizes that it's a weird, strange result to have. Nobody expected it. It's out of the blue. Weird. What could have caused that? Don't know, but it definitely wasn't rigging. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you have to understand, not only is saying that the American electoral system is broken and that rigging goes on all the time, not only is that false, it's false. Why is it false? That's a good question, right? Why is it false? It's false because we want it to be false. Because we need it to be false. It could also be objectively false, but more than it being objectively false, because sometimes at some point in history there might be some rigged elections, right? So it's not always going to be false. But what the constant throughout, let's say in the modern era in America, is that everybody in America needs it to be false. It has to be true that our democratic process works.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, we're fucked.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, and ordinary people have a vested interest in it being sound, the democratic process being solid and legitimate, because it's their representation. It's their sense that they can have some impact on their own futures, the future of the country, collectively, etc. If you take that away, they're bereft, they're cast adrift. They have no longer. What's the point? If they realize that the electoral system was broken and votes were rigged all the time, why would I even bother talking to people? No more political discussions, no more fighting, no more protests, no more posting on social media, no more PACs, no more political organisations, grassroots organisations, because, well, it's pointless.
Yeah.
We don't get to decide anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a personal vested interest in many people in it being legitimate, which is really useful for the people who run the country.
We would have a very, what the kids call black-pilled view of it.
Black-pilled?
Black-pilled is when you're like...
Even worse than
there's
red-pilled?
no point. There's no the left, right, blue, right. There's no point in getting actively engaged because there's nothing to win. There is no... It's the system is fixed against you. The system more broadly, I don't mean elections necessarily, okay? So, for example... I was setting that up to say that I see silver linings in this. Blake Masters is probably lost, in quotes, okay? But his campaign had some awesome ads, and he spoke it to people all the time. So lots of Arizonans heard the message that the country is ruled by psychopaths. And he gave examples of this. He didn't, harp on about specifically the medical condition or not, but that's as far as you can take it. If you think about it, there's a contest for power. It's an ongoing process because that's how democracy apparently works, okay? Mm-hmm. There's a change. The people from below decide they want to change. It might take a few elections for it to actually manifest in a switch, a regime change, a change of direction of the ship of state. But Americans have a long-standing belief that is ultimately how it works. And they're proud of it because, unlike, as Joe Rogan says, every other country until us in 1776 was just a backward tyrannical dictatorship. And the only way you could come to power was by chopping someone's head off or starting a revolution. Well, we have moral standing in the world because we invented or came up with a new large-scale system that would ensure the peaceful transfer of power. They have to keep believing that. Because, anyway, back to Blake Masters, he took it to the point where it's as far as you can go. When you say to the electorate that your country is basically, he didn't use the term, but it's a pathocracy. Most of the people with most of the influence at this point are fundamentally mentally different from most of the rest of the population. To the point where if it's anything remotely like the clinical definition of psychopathy, you cannot possibly win a fair game according to the traditional means against them. He brought it to that point of awareness.
So what's he doing running for?
I know. If he really followed it through, he would have said to himself, well, that's pointless. But still, I suppose for himself, I've no idea what he really believes, but maybe he thought it's worth giving it a shot. I'll give it one shot or something. So he has done so.
Yeah.
But that is, for me, that is, given the direction in the cycle that America has gone through over a long period of time, we have encrusted psychopathy, or what they more classically call totalitarian type system on top. Yeah, it's liberal democracy. Yeah, that's all just the official. It's encrusted. It's locked in. It will not yield anymore in the way that people believed it would before, where from below there's a push to change the top, maybe over here in a different direction, and it would yield a bit over the centuries. At this point in history, it's not for yielding. It's not going to. The rest of you can suck it up, cupcake kind of thing. So he articulated it to the point. Okay, so if it's pathocratic and it's locked in like that, well, we've only got one last shot. I can talk to the people and say to them, this is how bad it is
Mhm.
at the top.
Mhm.
We have to do this. We have to change this, or it's all gone.
Mm.
It's all going to come crashing down. I don't think he ever articulated as such.
That's
But that
implied.
is an implied meaning of what he said.
Mhm.
We must win here, or we're goners. Maybe not us living right now per se, but our children. He has a young family.
Mhm.
Their future is really fucked up.
Mm.
So that's why he was in it to win it.
Mm.
Of course, what he ran on has been proven true by what happened.
What happened?
He lost,
Oh,
in quotes.
right.
His message to people that, they're psychos, aren't they? Apparently,
No one agreed. Very,
or
not
a
enough people
minority,
agreed.
a minority of people, a majority disagreed with him.
Yeah.
A majority of Arizonans said, no, there's no problem with the border wall. Millions coming in, it's fine. We're Arizonans and we're fine with that.
Hmm.
That's ostensibly, of course, we know that's not the case. So what I'm getting at is ... something JFK said, when you make peaceful evolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. That's what's coming next.
Hmm.
That's my longer term prediction. I'm not suggesting that people are about to take up arms
Hmm.
now. There's still good times in America.
And you wouldn't
it's
advocate
not
them to
completely-
do so either.
No, never, because it's a waste. That's also a waste of
Right.
time. But
Insurrections are bad.
I'm stepping out of it, and I don't have a say. We don't have a
know.
horse in this race, for God's
No.
sake.
But-
I'm just saying that that's an inexorable approaching result of where this is going to go. You give people no longer the means to express their wishes.
Yeah.
Not anywhere.
Hmm.
So
Do you mean they're going to storm the Capitol again? Because that's the thing that scares me the most. That's
no,
what terrifies
there are
me.
mitigating factors. Americans are lucky because they have such a massive continent-sized country.
Mm.
It's more likely that the capital is going to realize how much they're hated and come out of the capital, so to speak, and demand increased extraction, taxation, obedience
Mm.
from the public. We got a glimpse of that during COVID.
Mm.
You, Red County over there in the middle of the heartland, you will enforce the vaccines, or else
Or the mask mandates.
or the mass or the lockdowns.
Based- based on a bunch of
there were
gay-
7 states that
gay
did
fellas
not
and-
do the lockdowns,
Yeah.
and they were all heartland states, almost all contiguously connected. The Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, I think. They had no full-on stay-at-home order, blah blah blah, but everyone else, around them did,
Yeah.
and that was the center, Washington, going over the wishes of probably a lot of the governors who didn't want to do it. It's almost certain DeSantis in Florida didn't want to do it, but he actually did in the first one. He sort of quote unquote folded. He did issue a stay-at-home
Very
lockdown
beginning, yeah.
order in the first one.
Yeah.
In March, April 2020.
Do you remember one of the reason for one of the federal mask mandates that they tried to impose in the whole country, that Biden tried to impose in the whole country? Was it under Biden? No, it was under. Yeah, it was under Biden. Do you remember one of them was that there was a bunch of gay fellas all got in a big pile up in New England in one of the northern states, and there was a big outbreak there, and so Biden said, well, since this kind of thing goes on all around the country, especially in the heartland down south, where a load of gay fellas are all naked in a big pile together, everybody needs to put the mask on. Just go to BBC, just to back up what I'm saying here, just in terms of impressions, like, is there not a thing beside Trump there? Do you have it zoomed in? Anyway, well, one of them was senior Republicans turn on Trump over election failings. There, that one. And on the right, why Democrats winning the Senate matters. And underneath it says, this history-defying result means the Republicans can't block Joe Biden's nominees for federal courts. History-defying. I mean, the BBC, everybody recognises this is just a completely, oh my God, how did this happen? This is totally unexpected. Right up until the last minute, we were expecting it to be the opposite of what happened, but that's not what happened. History-defying, out of the blue. And you know what? Nobody knows what happened. Against the grain, in sports and stuff like that, if something like that happened, horse race, something, or boxing, any kind of sports, if something was like a sure bet, it was like all the pundits were saying definitely this guy, this person, this horse, this whatever's going to win. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows it. And then some kind of also ran.
Yeah.
Storms to the finish. There's immediately an investigation, like.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the other important point was senior Republicans turn on Trump. Now, not a lot of them needed a lot of reason or motivation to turn on Trump. In fact, that's what they've been. That's what they've been going for, attempting to do over the past few years. Yeah, bottom line is Washington establishment, Democrat, Republican, doesn't really make much difference. They're all part of a gang, basically. And again, that's not controversial to say. That's, you know, anybody with any sense knows that that's the case. It's self-perpetuating. And Trump was he's an outsider. He was an outsider.
It's interesting that now, not just senior Republicans, but Republican likely voters, the latest YouGov poll shows that they would choose DeSantis over Trump.
Right.
But that's new since this midterm elections.
Mm-hmm.
This summer, like Trump was 3-1, 4-1 votes over DeSantis for being the Republican nominee for president in 2024. So that's, I don't know if that's a real reflection. Again, polls,
To see,
like elections, they could be trying to, I think there's an element of social proofing going on here. They're trying to create the appearance that everyone's against Trump.
Yeah.
So why
for
would
sure.
you be
Yeah.
for him, you know?
Well, yeah, it's given a reason, a legitimate reason, I suppose, for the establishment Republicans to ditch Trump, while not appearing to or not alienating themselves from the electorate. Right?
Yeah.
They're trying to get the electorate on board with this as well. But I think it's going to be a hard sell, basically. You know, I mean,
Well, I'm seeing
some of them,
a lot
yes,
of
but
pro-Trump
Formerly pro-Trump.
commentators and writers, journalists
are taking the bait. Yeah.
are saying it's got to be DeSantis now. Why would anyone vote for Trump?
Just go back to the BBC there and just scroll down to a few underneath US midterm elections. Yeah, just below that. Well, maybe a bit more. There you go. See the middle one? How Republican Ron DeSantis conquered Florida. Click on that. Again, BBC. Suddenly BBC has, you know, figured out who Ron DeSantis is, right?
Yeah.
While he was like a pariah during COVID because he was, you know, not in favour of lockdowns and vaccines and he's anti-woke and stuff. Now he conquered Florida, and then just look at the top interesting, just little things that stick out to me here. No longer can Florida be referred to as a swing state, so complete was the Republican victory there in the U.S. Congress elections. The success was led by one man, a new star of the right. What's interesting about that?
The new star of the right.
There's a
Well-
word missing that would have been in there.
A new star of the far right.
Correct.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis was far right until
Now
last
he's
week.
just right, which means conservative, which means mainstream, which
Yeah.
means cool. Far right is, you know, beyond the pale. They're
Don't
the
vote for them.
deplorables,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of
And
wording.
then they asked, well, how did Ron DeSantis do it? Well, Trump went on a rant this week over on his Truth Social, and he said Ron DeSantis did it because I stepped
him in,
in his midterms in 2018 and got him elected, which is true. There's polls before and after of how well DeSantis was doing before and after Trump's endorsement of him in 2018. Ron DeSantis, Floridians went, who? Okay, Trump, we'll vote for him if you endorsed him in 2018. That's how. So that's now we have some insight into last week. We were wondering why Trump had bitched about DeSantis in one of his rallies when he called him Ron DeSanctimonious.
Right.
As he was reading out the last pre-midterm poll numbers for who Republican voters would choose as their nominee, he had a big board behind him and he was saying Trump is still number one at 70 something or 60 whatever at that point. And then he's like, next down the list, oh there, look at that, 14% Ron DeSanctimonious. And so many people misread that. They just pro-Trump people like on social media and are like, what's up with Trump? Why could he be attacking DeSantis like that? That's just terrible. Well, now the headlines after this last week kind of speak to almost certainly speak to what Trump was suspecting was going on. That's okay. So that's the BBC. Yeah, the first clue was that the international media was learning about him as well. But on the day of, the day after, so the 9th, CNN published this. CNN haven't even, Ron DeSantis has not so much as intimated that he's going to run in 2024. But look what CNN had to say the day after he won in Florida last week.
Huh. So they're telling him that he's running. This is CNN.
They're announcing to Americans to the left that this is the new man in 2024.
And isn't that awesome? Yep. It's going to be a long 2 years between now and then. Lots of water lots of turbulent water to flow under the bridge.
Here's another interesting one. We've shown the BBC, but that's like now 5 days into the conversation. Also on November 9th, this was the first international, so non-American media I saw talk about the Trump-DeSantis dynamic. This is the British Telegraph headline on the cover page on November 9th. There's an interesting slip in the title. They've tweaked the image here to make it appear that Trump is on stage with
Yeah.
and
That's
he's
Trump
walking off.
sadly walking away.
Sadly walking away as the new
I'm
star.
not wanted anymore. Ron's the new president.
Check the dates. November 9th, just after midterms. Meet Ron. So this is they're introducing into an international. Meet Ron and Casey DeSantis, America's new first family,
Ooh,
in quotes.
lovely.
And of course, with the juxtaposition of Trump moving off stage, there's a slip. There's a kind of a Freudian slip that's gone on here, because between the lines, they're implying that Trump and Melania are the current actual first family.
Well, they rep for a Republican too. For Republican pop.
Oh, that title says America's, not the Republicans. America's new first family.
I don't think they were trying to say that the election was stolen.
No, of course not. But they even in.
Well, they're saying they're just highlighting the weight and the presence that Trump still has for Americans and American voters and especially Republicans. I think it's a tacit recognition of what everybody knows is that Trump is basically he is the Republican Party rather than the actual president. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than the president. I mean, he's obviously not like Trump and Melania are not the president and first lady in exile for Democrats or for the lefties. You know what I mean? I mean, so the only way that they would be seen in that way would be if there was some intimation that they were the legitimate president, that Trump was the legitimate president. Do you know what I mean? If they're not saying he's a legitimate president, the only thing they can be saying is that this guy is, he represents the Republican Party. You know what I mean?
No, because the Telegraph headline says America's first family.
Yeah.
Not Republicans.
Yeah. But what do you mean by first family?
Conventionally in the United States, the first family is the president and his family.
Yeah.
America's new first family.
So they were, in a Freudian way, they were saying that Trump is still the president.
Yeah. Or to most people.
That's what I mean.
Most people recognize that he is.
Yeah, to most people. And, well, certainly to Republican voters and to Republicans. But definitely not to the woke left.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, it's more or less saying the same thing, that he is, in terms of the conservative voters in America, he's the leader. And they're not saying he should be the leader, but they're saying they're tacitly admitting, even openly, and if you were to talk to them, they would probably admit, he's the guy that Republican voters, conservative voters look to. He should be the next presidential candidate in 2024, as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
And they're trying to shove him off stage and put in Ron DeSantis in his place because he's more acceptable. He's got kids and young kids, and he's not far right. He didn't need an insurrection. He didn't clue the Russians. All those lies.
Isn't it interesting that DeSantis, who was more at the forefront of sticking two fingers to the World Health Organization, the CDC, the vaccines, the quote-unquote globalist agenda, the woke agenda. Well, Trump was too, of course, but in a much more bold way than Trump in his last year. They don't mind that, apparently.
Somebody knows.
For some reason, Trump is they really, 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 really hate Trump.
Of course.
Even if there's someone else who's actually quite like Trump on many issues.
Yeah. What annoys me about this, and this is a big problem across the spectrum of news and stuff that the media talks about, of global import and all that kind of stuff, is the lack of explanation as to why. Everybody agrees that Trump is a problem, but it's not a lack of explanation, but the explanation as to why this is a problem, why this is happening, why we hate this, why we should be against this. The explanation that they give is invariably inane, childish, infantile.
Or
It's ridiculous.
superficial.
Well, it's ridiculous.
He doesn't speak well.
It's
or-
ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically a tantamount to saying, well, Trump is a problem. We want to get rid of him. We leveraged all of the power of the deep state basically to get rid of him by fabricating lies and all that kind of stuff. Russiagate, made up all sorts of stories against him to get rid of him because he's a poopy head. That's your reason? Yeah. He's not a nice person. He doesn't have any other. There's no other reason why we don't like him other than he's orange. Which is why they came up with Orange Man Bad, right?
Yeah. It's
that
mocking their silly
mocking
reasons.
their stupid, obviously untrue or fake or false reason as to why they went to such lengths to get rid of him. There's no in-depth discourse or detailed or nuanced or more true discourse about any of these global problems that are going on, Trump being one of them, let's say, from the media or from government. They resort to name-calling, and that's where they leave it. They don't tell people why. And isn't he stupid? Don't you all agree? Look at him. Look, here's a picture of Trump, I think it was 2016 or just after 2016 when he won. I was having this discussion with people on Facebook, and a lot of them were, there was a whole media furor about Trump. Oh my God, people were screaming at the sky. And there was back and forth with me and a bunch of other people. And one person just answered. I was kind of making the same point then. What's your problem with Trump? Like, really, let's look beyond all the name calling and stuff. What's your problem? And the final answer was just to put up a close-up picture of Trump's face. We could see all the pock marks and stuff. That was the answer. I don't like the look of him.
Yeah.
I'm like,
It's George,
the issues are a bit.
It's Orwellian hate week,
Well, the issues are a bit more serious, a bit more important than I don't like the way he looks. You know what I mean?
And yet they'll happily vote for Fetterman,
right?
Who clearly looks like, with all due respect, he should be in Elephant Man.
But it
in a
depends.
circus.
That speaks to the extent to which it's people who came up with that idea of Trump is ugly, Orange Man Bad, or whatever. That was encouraged in them by the media. They didn't naturally come to that conclusion, and Fetterman's a good example. The media has kind of polished Fetterman in such a way with words and pictures and coverage to make him look like he's as awesome as he can look, right? So you have much less people, far fewer people, just going, I'm not voting for him because he's got a big lump on his neck and he looks like, what do you call him?
Uncle Fester.
Uncle Fester, right? I'm not voting for Uncle Fester. So yeah, media has a lot to do with shaping people's opinion, and that's the problem. People don't talk about it. And there's other areas. I'll talk about those later on.
So what do you think it was? War and peace?
What?
Trump, man of peace, military hated him, generals wanted him out.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about DeSantis is that I think they're big up in DeSantis because as much as DeSantis was, he ticked all the box in terms of over the past few years for the right wing in terms of anti-COVID, anti-lockdown, anti-woke, anti-abortion, all this kind of stuff. He was on topic on all of those, but still, pretty much the same things that Trump was on. But why him? Why support him now? Why does the left actually want to promote him? Why are they happy with him when they were dead set against Trump? I think it's because they assume, rightly or wrongly, that he's more of an establishment figure.
Well, he's a career man. Trump came out of nowhere into politics.
Right. Came
Straight
out of
into
business,
the White House.
Right. And his attitude,
Ron DeSantis has been a politician since...
He was in the Navy as well, right?
15 years.
That
DeSantis joined the United States Navy, red flag, in 2004 and was promoted to lieutenant before serving as a legal advisor to SEAL Team 1, red flag. He was deployed to Iraq in 2007. Well, so was Tulsi Gabbard, When he returned to the U.S. a year later, the U.S. Department of Justice appointed DeSantis promotion award after Iraq reward. DOJ appointed DeSantis to serve as a special assistant U.S. attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida. So, yeah, that's kind of dodgy. Navy, Iraq, straight into government.
Mm-hmm.
It's very smooth.
And that's not to say there's some kind of conspiracy involved, whatever, or he's in on it or anything like that.
Yeah,
but
but
rather, when
to
it
be
comes...
well suited to the regime in these times?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's important, yeah. It's important for the establishment's point of view that, they get a read on someone like that and they realize, okay, at least when this guy comes into the White House, he can have all his conservative perspectives, he can keep those going, but the main thing is that the Trumanite network, the efficient government, the guys behind the scenes, the deep state, some people call it, that he'll respect them. Trump didn't. Trump, right, in 2016, I think he did, he dealt with it for a couple of weeks, the daily intelligence briefings the presidents get every morning, telling presidents what to talk about and here's what's going on. Here's the state of the country today and here's what you should talk about. Trump just, after a couple of weeks, said, you know what, I don't want those anymore. That was a big... and that's when we've mentioned this quote often before about Chuck Schumer saying, yeah, they've got 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. And they did, of course. But I think they're more confident that DeSantis in the White House, if that were to happen, of course they hope that he won't, but if that were to happen, that he'd be much more compliant. He would understand and recognize which side his bread was buttered on.
so that's what's coming next, the battle between those two. This coming week, Trump's big announcement, supposedly he'll announce he's running Tuesday. And then we'll see. I suppose they're banking on, over the next 2 years, watering down the actual Republican support for Trump. So it's just more of the same, Russiagate style.
Yeah, it's going to keep
attacks
going.
against Trump's.
It'll keep going.
It's going to have been,
to the extent that it's needed.
2016, 2024.
8 years, yeah.
8 years of it. That's like
Wiley, until he just disappears and goes away and stop having those rallies, they're gonna keep on him,
I saw a Washington Post article. I can't for the life of me find it now. Maybe I published it on my Twitter account. It was from Midsummer, and it was one of those clickbait headlines. Washington Post announces these are our top 10 faves for likely 2024 GOP presidential nominee.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was a rambling introduction, and they said, we know the polls, which at that time was, I think it was published in June, we know the polls show Trump voters, Republicans would most likely vote Trump 77%. And we know that DeSantis is way down here at 16.
Mm-hmm.
But our top man, our number one pick for the GOP nomination by a hair is Ron DeSantis. Now, hear us out, they said. Why? Because that's 2 years away and a lot of things can happen between now and then. A lot of things. It was a kind of a sneaky warning. They knew something. Somebody who wrote that knew something on the inside about what was coming. And could put their neck out and their reputation out against the polls and say that, just you watch, those polls won't be that way come 2024. Come the debates, the TV debates that Trump became famous for, just ahead of 2016. Interesting. Maybe
yeah.
Who knows? Maybe Trump won't even make it to the debates. And all people will get to see will be Ron DeSantis against Ted Cruz and Rubio or whoever else wants to run.
Right.
And DeSantis will be the fallback choice for Trumpians.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's gonna hobble on. I suppose it's gonna limp on over the next couple of years. It won't even be that long. It'll start political shenanigans in about a year's time. About a year before 1 year in advance of the 2024 elections. So in about a year from now, or even beforehand, isn't it? No, it's the following year that they have the Congress and stuff.
Yeah, well, people don't get too hung up on it because the world's going to change significantly in the next couple of years. The US, well, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to mean for situation on the ground in the US, but these moves are fought geopolitically. They're going to change something big time probably next year. I don't know if you want to talk about that next.
What? Next year?
Well, no, what's happening now in Ukraine,
Mm.
what's happening now with BRICS, what's happening now with Xi Jinping is leaving Saudi Arabia for only the second time in the last 3 years because of COVID, right? And whatever fears he had of, he wasn't afraid of COVID, obviously, he was afraid of something else. He's leaving China to go to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, at the invitation of Mohammed bin Salman.
Mm-hmm.
The rumor is, well, the official reason is to discuss trade and security. This has almost certainly got something to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia is among 13 countries that have applied formally this last week to join BRICS.
Mm-hmm.
BRICS, this should have been headline news everywhere, but of course it's still an American US dollar, US media dominated world. But BRICS announced the month previous in October that they are now actively working to form a new, quote, world reserve currency.
Yep.
This has got to do with the petrodollar, almost certainly.
Here's a picture just of the BRICS to give people a cartographical representation of the red is existing current BRICS members and orange is proposed. If those proposed countries join, 50% of the global population, more than 50% of the global population, and 60% of global gas and 45% of global oil reserves.
If just 2 of those 4 Muslim majority countries join, it's curtains. Algeria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Especially, I mean,
Argentina.
if something happens like where Iran and Saudi Arabia join at the same time, like, it's going to be a 5-alarm DEFCON 4 in the United States. The whole system is propped up by petrodollar. If Saudi Arabia starts declaring that they will no longer require payment to be in dollar, nothing more than that. They won't do something as sudden and black and white as switching to, we hereby declare it can only be in a BRICS basket of currency type, whatever the scheme they come up with.
Mm-hmm.
But they may just open it up. Just opening it up is a problem. Because the only reason the petrodollar system works is because currently Saudi Arabia only accepts dollar payments.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at here is that we're not going to see an overnight shift. The dollar will still have, well, Jesus. I mean, Indonesia's hosting the G20 shortly, right? Indonesia's leader was complaining recently that still at this point, in actual practical terms, for all the talk people have about a new world currency reserve system, 90% of world trade is still US dollar based. Mm-hmm. So this isn't going to go from 90 to 0 or 90 even to 50 overnight, but just the beginning of a downturn is enough. The US is so overstretched economically. It can only keep printing bloody dollars to do anything. Have a US budget, pay for US troops in Poland and Romania. It can only do all of that because it's stretched to the max. A hit on it financially, that's even the wrong word to use. A slight downturn in the use of the dollar is already a bad juju because these have non-linear effects.
Or snowball effects.
Snowball effects. What I'm getting at here, well, here's another news item from the last 2 weeks. Remember that strange report with the Wall Street Journal? Washington warns Saudi Arabia that Iran is plotting attack against you. And the report's like, yeah, so the National Security Council and some of our Saudi partners, but not MBS, obviously, would just like to warn Saudi Arabia that Iran could start a war with you basically anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's cool. We've got your back.
Mm-hmm. It smacks of a desperate attempt by the Americans to kind
Something's
of
going to happen here.
keep their friends close and their enemies.
Well, to threaten their friends.
Well,
It's a
to
threat.
threaten their friends, or to probably to threaten their friends. Yeah, I'm sure the Saudis aren't that stupid, right? They saw it as much rather than an actual legitimate threat from Iran. Rather, some kind of an attack could occur that would, that could, some kind of a provocation could be orchestrated that would, that would create a situation where Iran and Saudi Arabia would go to war with each other in one way or another. Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Somebody could insert provocation.
Well, let's take a recent reality-based example of what happened when a very close friend of ours, America's, seemed like it was actually going to do something we didn't like. So what did we do?
Who?
Nord
What?
Stream,
Hmm.
Germany.
Hmm.
I mean, if they're
Yeah.
prepared to do that to Germany,
Hmm.
and the reliance they have that Germany, as the beating heart of European industry, continues to play ball geopolitically with Washington's wants. While Saudi Arabia is far more significant because of the petrodollar system. If Saudi Arabia opens up payments for its oil beyond the dollar, like
Right.
that, I think that's that would be a bigger
Mhm.
system. That will require Nord Stream like action,
there'll
executive
there'll be a
action.
regime change in Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
If that's, for example, and so then you're like, well, how would they do that? There were American troops in Saudi Arabia since 1990.
Yeah.
They have bases there. Not a lot
Qatar,
officially,
so.
but shit, neither did Poland or Romania until this year. There's now 40,000 in Poland. When the situation changes, they can drastically increase it. So then you're like, well, okay, well, MBS won't agree to that. Maybe it'll happen behind his back, because in that Washington, I think it was Wall Street Journal report about the U.S. National Security Council warning Saudi Arabia that Iran was plotting to do war, but it's okay, we got your back.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason that worked, otherwise the Saudis would have gone, that's fake information. The only reason it worked was because the NSC had their contacts within the Saudi intelligence structure. The Saudi government has been so long. If Germany was rebuilt after World War II and is like this with the US, and so it's riddled with people who would, do whatever Washington says.
Mhm.
The same goes for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. The threat from an attack by Iran on Saudi Arabia coming probably from inside Washington, inside Langley, probably spoke to, because it's linked to the threat that whenever the Saudis claimed that they were, or said that they were going to stop oil production, which was going to hurt. That was another thing that was meant to hurt Biden in the midterms, right? Was the Saudis cutting 2 million barrels of oil a day, therefore spiking the prices, and the price of the pumping a big issue for voters. That was meant to.
Good point. The incumbent party, I think the fact was, have always lost coming up to an election
when gas prices
when gas prices went up.
Yeah,
It's
another one of those inexplicable
how
things.
on earth,
Neil.
out of the blue, history-defying moment.
But in response to the Saudis saying that a few weeks ago, a bunch of American members of the Senate and Congress said that they were proposed that they would stop military equipment supplying weapons basically to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia's military is basically American made almost entirely. So there's a kind of implied threat there as well, in the sense that we have a lot of leverage over the efficiency or the effectiveness of your military. What would happen if Iran attacked you and suddenly a lot of your weapons didn't work, or you didn't have the parts, or you couldn't, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You couldn't repair them, or you couldn't get new parts, you couldn't get more weapons. It'd be a bad situation, no? Maybe you should rethink that whole oil thing. Yeah,
well, Saudi Arabia is in a pickle, because that is actually, you just described the dynamic with respect to Yemen. The only reason the Yemenis haven't not only just won yet, but taken a portion of Saudi Arabia, its larger, more powerful neighbor, is because of the extent of U.S. military involvement there, to the point that, they resupply the planes. They even have like Saudi fighter pilots flying the damn planes who are Australian mercenaries, American, British, French.
Quote unquote Saudi, yeah.
The dependence is huge
Just before
for Yemen.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Just before we leave Trump, I forgot to add this in. This is Biden just, I think it was a few days ago, saying this.
Have to demonstrate that he will not take power by, if he does run, making sure he, under legitimate efforts of our Constitution, does not become the next president again.
So, how does that work? Where elected president is talking about the upcoming 2024 elections and saying that his main opposition, who would and is supposedly going to run for president, that we have to make sure what legitimate efforts of the Constitution exist to stop someone from becoming president. I suppose that's legal or something. I don't know. Does the Constitution allow for? Is there some?
This is
there
tricky
some
terrain
clause,
because the
is there a
person
clause in the Constitution that says we can stop this guy from becoming president. If he's like a traitor or something, or if, something like that.
Well, they did try to impeach him twice,
right?
Using the constitutional means.
But if right now, there isn't any legitimate reasons for Trump not to become the next president, you'd have to make some up then, wouldn't you? You'd have to fabricate the reasons to make them legitimate under the Constitution. You'd have to.
His statement is loaded with suggestion, isn't it? The problem with even going there is, how do I say this? The person who says there in that statement, legitimate efforts under the Constitution, what does that person mean by that? Ordinary people will have a different understanding of legitimate efforts under the Constitution than that particular individual.
Mm-hmm. Well, based on what they did so far to delegitimize Trump, they were effectively, they're certainly immoral and illegal, although there's no legal action it seems possible to take against the people who committed those acts against Trump, which was effectively to fabricate claims against him and then try and drag him through the courts based on false allegations. That's technically illegal. So if that's a precedent, then it's reasonable for anybody to assume that what he's talking about there is we will continue to use all sorts of underhanded tactics to stop him from becoming president again. And again, why? What's your if the majority of the population in 2024 want Trump to be president, isn't that democracy? Surely you can't stop the will of the people, right? Surely, or can you? I don't know. Fucking clown shoes world, like these people are talking about
the will of the people. Like we're looking at this. We're looking at this to the wrong end of the telescope. The will of the people became as close to actually being expressed as it has in the United States since John F. Kennedy, when Trump was elected in 2016. I know I don't particularly like putting the two men on the same par, but that is what happened. One of them had his brains blown out in Texas, and that was the end of it. The will of the people went with his pieces of brain on the back of that limo. The other one won legitimately. But even then, I could see how this was being cooked in real time. You remember how long it took? Oh, this is no longer strange to people, but it was strange to me at the time. And Megyn Kelly on Fox, she was then on Fox News, was like, what the hell is going on? The convention in the last, that everyone living remembers, is that the result is declared by 11 p.m. at night. It was 3 a.m. Eastern time before Trump went, sorry to keep you waiting, folks. Complicated business. That's because they were trying. Something was going on in the background. We're like, can we block this? We got to block this. Do something. Well, they gave him the acknowledgement. He was allowed to declare it. But then it was 4 weeks more of finding more ballots, That was the first time ballots became elevated over votes, right? 4 weeks of finding more and more votes for Hillary, and it went on, and the delegitimization process using legal constitutional means, which is making shit up in the media, began. They were telling people weeks into it, we found so many votes that Hillary Clinton has won the popular vote,
Right.
and this guy has only won barely because of the Electoral College. And they were trying to get people to agitate, change the Electoral College system, so that would never happen again.
And just briefly on votes and just for people who don't know, votes and ballots. Votes is when you go into the polling station or whatever, or the voting booth, whatever, get a piece of paper, tick beside your candidate, put it in a box, and it's taken and counted. Ballots is when the same kind of piece of paper, but different obviously, is sent out to people across the country, older people, whoever, anybody who doesn't feel like going into and voting in person. The party, obviously, like the Democrat or Republican Party, but there seems to be a big Democrat Party thing.
Oh, yeah.
Democrats have leveraged this far more than Republicans, where they're sending out massive amounts of actual voting slips for people to, like with a self-addressed envelope, and supposedly at home they can be electronic, they can be real, they're somehow meant to mark their preference on it and then send it back, or send it to a collection point like a drop box or something, and then someone comes with a black bag, fills a black bag with all those ballots that were sent out, and then takes them off somewhere and counts them. So it just sounds super dodgy on the face of it. I know counting votes is complicated, and it's come a long way, huh? It's come a long way from the way it used to be, which is that you'd go to the voting station, it'd be a gym, a gymnasium or something like that, or a library or whatever in your local area. You'd go into a little behind the curtain, take your thing, put it in the box, put it into the box, and then they would be taken there just out the back, and authorized people would count them in that place, and then tally it up and send the numbers off. We're very far from that at this point, where it's like sending stuff out across the country or across hundreds of miles to homes with stamped addressed envelopes, or not even that, not even send them back, take them to a pillbox, basically, like a letter, like a post box, basically, on the side of the street, and put it in there. Or even worse than that, people coming to your door to pick them back up from you. Loads of activists coming. Did you get your ballot? Did you fill it in? Do you want me to help you to fill it in? Now give it to me. I'm going to take it back, and don't worry, it'll be counted.
Yeah, you haven't even. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But I'm afraid if we talk about it's already become mis/disinformation to use the term ballot harvesting, even though this has actually been happening for decades.
Yeah, but it's legitimate in a sense. It's just very dodgy, but it sounds dodgy. It's not.
It's primarily one side that does it.
Right, the Dems, yeah.
The Dems, but yeah.
Sorry, can't talk about it.
All
All right, we better not talk anymore about the election, or we'll get. There'll be a Tomahawk cruise missile. Blow up our studio here. Yeah. So what's going on in?
Well, can we go back to geopolitics, or you want to stay on American domestic?
Let's leave America.
Which is shot to hell.
Let's leave America.
Yeah.
Let's
Well, we're not leaving America at the same time, because the international stuff.
Well, of course, yeah. You can't. That's the problem. You can't get away from America.
You can't. No,
They're everywhere.
Basically,
they're under your bed.
Basically, the rest of the world is actively conspiring against the United States. That's basically what's happening.
Geopolitically, yeah.
We suspected it for a while, but you could never quite tell where someone really stood. But the lines are becoming sharper. 12 new countries, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, for crying out loud, applying to join BRICS, and applying to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a lot more, has a security and military element to it as well. It's curtains. It's curtains for the United States. But this should be the big news. This should be the main news. Instead, everyone's focused on the election, focusing in on, and there's such crux. Let's leave them to it. Biden is up there gloating over the result, basking in the glow of the glory, of the fake glory. It's not real glory. But let's let him have it. He said this week he's to meet or have a virtual meeting with Xi Jinping at the G20, maybe to meet in person. And he was asked, this is an example of how the media works. He was asked, "Sir, do you feel that these results give you, a stronger hand going into your meeting with Xi Jinping?" He said, yes, I feel like I have the backing of the American people behind me as I go to stand up to Xi Jinping.
Right, yeah.
Like, let them believe their fantasy. Like, they're fucking crooked. They're so crooked. Do they actually believe it? I'm not sure. But
so that means that when he goes to shirt front, as they say in Australia, Xi Jinping, that he'll have the backing of the American people, and if that ultimately involves war with China over Taiwan, then he's got the backing of the American people for that too, right?
yeah, they'll be right behind him.
Yeah. This is in the Atlantic a few days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. Taiwan prepares to be invaded. If China wants to do something drastic, President Tsai Ing-wen told me, Xi has to weigh the costs. He has to think twice. So this is basically, the president of Taiwan telling the Atlantic that, in the near future, there's going to be a war.
Yeah, the two Alexes said that if 2022 was Ukraine and everything Ukraine, next year it will be Saudi Arabia. And they're basing it on what we said is probably going on with China partnering with Saudi Arabia over a new petro yuan. But I'm thinking Taiwan is, I believe, they're probably, Ben Rhodes is ex-Obama, of course it's the Atlantic. I believe them in that Taiwan is going to be the issue 2023. Maybe Saudi Arabia will come first, but there's another item. Oh gosh, can't remember what it is now. There's a report. Do you remember this time last year? We noticed that anonymous U.S. officials were talking to Bloomberg, Financial Times, etc., warning them that we know Russia's going to invade. Invasion. And we also know that the sanctions we have lined up when that kicks in are going to harm European economy. Possibly the US too, but we think we got that covered. They knew ahead of time. It spooked the hell out of us because we'd been talking in the months prior about the apparent willfulness with which Western leaders and governments and corporations were self-destructing. They seemed to be aware that shortages were coming as a result of lockdowns and supply chain issues, and not only not doing anything about it, but preparing for that as reality and accepting it. And we're like, what the hell? What is going on here? And then that led us to speculate that, here comes Ukraine and here comes the US government saying the sanctions are going to have negative economic effects, especially in Europe. And we were like, Ukraine is going to be useful to them as a kind of a plausible reason and a motivating factor for why ordinary people should get behind. And we've seen that play out. This year went into, take that Putin, I'm taking a cold shower. I'm doing my bit for Ukraine by, my plant, my factory shutting down, stuff like that. Farcical. Well, there's another one. I wish I'd had it here now. I think it was Washington Post again. Again, anonymous U.S. officials warned that the upcoming war over Taiwan, but the Chinese upcoming invasion of Taiwan is going to cause such a global economic shock that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It smacked to me of the same thing, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah, it would. Seriously would, yeah. It would throw the markets, as they say. The markets wouldn't be happy. The markets would be very, very upset. They would go into meltdown. That would be a next stage in a downward trend. I don't know. You talk about plans there and them knowing in advance and stuff. Those are, I go back and forth. I can't decide whether these people who are in positions of power actually have a plan, or whether the whole thing's just coming apart because of their corruption and their greed, and they're just
Yeah,
doubling
I
down
know.
on their looting of, they're basically just filling their own pockets, and they're totally self-interested. And the negative effects of that, they're just putting them off and saying, oh, we'll sort that, don't worry, let's get some think tank to kind of come up with an explanation for why this is good, and why we're going to sort it out, and why it'll be okay in the end, type thing, while we busy ourselves with just personal profit, basically. So I don't know, although it does seem... So I don't know if we're reading that wrong in that sense, where we look at it and we see this coherence, we see this possible evidence of a planned, collapse in a certain sense, or a planned destruction of society, or whether that's
And
them
that
simply...
war is the cover for it.
Right, or whether they're simply... that's them simply responding to it. On the news cycle, it eventually filters out of the media, and this comes from government think tanks and government institutions who just make up stuff to explain what's happening already. And what's happening already is the, primarily economic but social decay of the Western unipolar world order, let's say, and it's it's collapsing in under its own weight and its own corruption. And the people in charge of it don't care because they're too concerned about their own about being corrupt and profiting for themselves. And all the narrative around it, you could see how that could look like, well, they know what they're doing and they're planning this. Obviously, therefore, if they can see this happening, they must be okay with it happening. But I don't think they really care. I don't know for sure, but I kind of tend to favor the idea that it's just more, at least more so, most of it is generalized corruption and moral, social, economic, etc. Decay as a result of that corruption at the top. And all of the theory making is just a way to kind of like cover their asses, basically, and keep people enthralled, keep them confused, distracted, don't let them see that what we're doing is actually sticking our hands into the piggy bank and robbing all the money out of it.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I understand.
Rather than some grand conspiracy
We
to-
vacillate between the two.
Yeah.
Well, now and again, though, something comes in, we're going, maybe they do know what they're doing. I found the article. Scotty can't open it because it's behind a paywall. For some reason, I can't. I'm able to see it, though. I didn't pay for it. But it's Financial Times. U.S. warns Europe a conflict over Taiwan could cause global economic shock. It's published
You can probably see the headline, no?
November 10th.
No?
November 10th. So
No, yeah. US warns Europe over conflict over Taiwan could cause global economic shock. Yep. Could cause... Look, I mean, Jesus Christ.
okay, but what's interesting? What they're saying is we've done some research and we're just sharing with our partners and allies the fruits of our research. Okay, good. Okay, but then if you know that a conflict over Taiwan could cause a global...
Why are you going ahead with it?
Why in the holy hell would you do that? Well, then they go, well, no, it's not us doing it. It's bloody China doing it. They're the ones who, when it comes to it, it's going to be like Russia. We didn't do... We smell of roses. Russia just invaded Ukraine.
Well, this gets into something I want.
But
Like I mentioned,
obviously they baited. They wanted it to happen. Or maybe not. Maybe it's not obvious.
no. The explanation for that gets into the whole geopolitics of the situation, and it gets into what's happening in Ukraine, what has been happening in Ukraine, and why Russia is in Ukraine. There's a Putin announced and Russia has been over the past 10 years at least, or more likely more, been planning a readjustment of the global order, basically, right? Away from, like he's been very explicit about, away from a unipolar order dominated by US and its vassals in Europe, towards a more equitable share of, power and influence and wealth in the globe with other countries. That is a death knell to America. You know what I mean? And it's not rational. It's basically when you've been, like we've talked about this before, when you've been sitting at the top table for, on your own at the top table, getting the lion's share of everything for 80 years or more, and you get very used to that. When the tide starts to turn and it's no longer sustainable, a rational person says, okay, we had it good while it lasted, but we got to make some adjustments here and, be more equitable. But they're not rational, right? We're talking about. They're corrupt, maybe they're psychopaths, whatever. They're extremely corrupt. They enjoy their positions at the top of the pyramid, top of the hierarchy, the political global hierarchy, and they're not willing to give it up. So when you have this pressure from others in the world who have risen up and who are able to confront you, well, being irrational people, they see that as something that they cannot accept, and they have to push back against it. And they see the actual perpetrator, that the person who's causing all the problems, are those ones who have risen up and have become more powerful, more influential, and want what's due to them, basically want what they're entitled to. That's seen as an attack. Analogy would be dysfunctional parents get used to treating, being the parents, being the adults, and telling the kids what to do all the time, and regimenting the children's lives, and telling them when to go to bed, when to get up, what to do all the time, and get pathologically attached to that. The kids, however, don't stay kids forever, grow up, and suddenly they're 18 or 16, even worse, and they start to push back against the parents. Rational parents would see that as, okay, listen, they're growing up, we've done our job. Okay, you can even spin it in a positive. America, kept the world or on the right path, if you want to say that, over the last 80 years, brought it to prosperity, blah, 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 blah. Give them all that kudos.
Yeah.
But now it's time to see the fruit of our labours over all these years flourish and allow the world to change and become, more inclusive, if I can use that word.
More diverse.
More
to
diverse.
Use their own bloody ideology.
And sharing of the, sharing of the control and the power, basically. But irrational parents go, no, that's not that's not what's going to happen. I'm a parent. They're children. I don't care how old they are. They're going to stay children, and they're going to do what I say. And then you get conflict. Ask the parent, and they'll say, well, those freaking teenagers are attacking me by growing up and challenging me. And they're no good on their own. They wouldn't be able to handle it.
Well,
they'd fuck it all up.
This is what the pathological parent frequently says. They're defying my wishes for what they do all the way through their lives. And the children, go on doing something different. I had great plans for you. You're going to go to that college and this job, and you're going to marry that person. And they're on their case into their 40s.
And you're going to look after me in my old age.
Yeah.
You're going to stay at home with mama and dada. And you're gonna work on the farm, and you're gonna look after us. You're gonna take over from us, and you're gonna do what we tell you, and until the day we die, we'll still be in control.
Okay, let's step this down one level from what we're saying.
So it's an my point is that they see it as an attack. That's how they rationalize it as an attack. So what China is doing, by China simply being China, by Russia simply being Russia, i.e. saying, listen, we're a big country, we have all these resources, we don't want to be told what to do anymore. That's an attack on America. It's not for a rational person. For an irrational, corrupt, psychopathic person, it is.
Right.
So again, where's the truth in this? It's their truth versus, of course, reality will be the decider. Or, again, like we talked about this, I think last week. There's an attitude of, okay, if you claim that you're able to carry your own weight type thing, or to impose yourself in the world, go ahead, try it. The only proof that of the truth of what you say is if you're able to do it. But you know what? I'm going to try and stop you all the way. And that'll be a good test for you. I'm going to, thwart you as much as possible in every possible direction, just to see if you're able to actually take my position, or take a position up here with me. I'm going to make it as hard as possible.
Well, it appears then that the European... Well, are they in it? The analogy, yeah. I don't know what the analogy is. Are the European leaders children to the American adults, or are they equally pathological parents?
Because they're more or less in their sphere. They're more like Igor to Dr. Frankenstein's Igor,
right,
or Renfield to Count Dracula. Yes, master, I'll do your bidding. I'll keep them down. Sorry.
There's a guy called Garland Nixon. He was Sputnik office in Washington, D.C. I don't know what he's doing now, because I think they closed it down there. He was interviewed by the Alexes last week on the Duran, and he had a great way to explain how he saw what was happening. He said that the EU, Europe more broadly, is voluntarily partly voluntarily, de-industrializing. That's being forced/helped in that process by the United States. Because the US, looking ahead to a conflict with China or to a quote near peer competition level with China, knows it needs to reindustrialize. So where's it going to get it from? Is it going to do it, from the ground up? No, it's going to basically shift European industry to the United States.
Yeah. Well, that's what they've been doing already. That's
Yeah.
already started this year. They see it as a boon, as an opportunity for Americans to take over. Any deindustrialization in Europe means American factories will be supplying the
No. It's worse than that. The whole scale uplifting of the German car
companies
industry
moving over. Yeah, but it's the same thing.
going across the Atlantic.
Same thing.
This is in the world.
Jobs in America.
Can you put that one up? I think this should show because it's. I got it from somewhere else. Wall Street Journal. This is from June, I think. High natural gas prices push European manufacturers to shift to the US.
Yep.
And they say it's the Ukraine war, blah, 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 is driving up energy costs in the US while relatively stable prices are luring companies to the United States from September 2022.
Yep.
And others have noticed as well, like this.
Green energy initiatives. That's government money, taxpayer money. In fact, it's the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 of this year. Is going to will raise 738 billion in spending on energy and climate change, i.e. green technology. So there's 738 billion US dollars of American taxpayers' money available, some of it available to European companies to go to America, set up in America, and go green. Basically, it's money making. I mean, it's just that's good for the American economy, and what's good for the American economy is good for American politicians. And there's all sorts of money to be made from that process. And the Europeans are well aware of it. Like, there's the French economy minister Bruno Le Maire actually said it again. This kind of speaks to what you were saying earlier on about these people knowing what's happening, at least not from a Machiavellian kind of conspiratorial plotting kind of point of view, but rather they see what's actually happening in Europe and they see what America is doing. And this is the French economy minister. He sees it, and well, what's left open, I suppose, is are you going to do anything about it? Just have a listen. Well, you have to read the subtitles.
Prévenir plutôt que guérir, je pense qu'il est temps que nous, Européens, nous disions très clairement à nos amis américains, nous avons sur ce sujet de l'IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, et sur le risque de désindustrialisation en Europe, une préoccupation majeure qui doit être réglée dans les meilleurs délais. Et nous, Européens, nous préférons trouver des solutions de compromis avec les États-Unis, mais si les solutions de compromis ne sont pas possibles, dans ce cas-là, nous saurons faire preuve de la même fermeté.
Yeah, go ahead. Show the same firmness, but basically saying it's a de-industrialization of Europe, and they're very concerned about the American Inflation Reduction Act.
Isn't that interesting?
Right.
A domestic law in the United States is being talked about in Europe, and not because
As directly impacting European industry,
Yeah.
which is, it's trade wars. This is a trade war, basically, but it's being done with a blunt instrument,
I think this is why
A blunt
I
instrument
thi-
being bombs that blow up Nord Stream 2, for example, or sanctions being imposed on all European companies if they do any business with Russia, if they buy Russian gas or Russian oil. That's a deindustrialization of Europe.
I think that's why this BRICS thing is taking off now. There's some urgency to this now. It doesn't involve Europe yet, but the rest of the world is like, holy shit, the US is hoovering up European industry, partly using terrorism, like blowing up Nord Stream. Here's another example. This is from this week as well. It's just like, it's amazing the extent to which the mask has come off the United States. This is 12th November, so this is yesterday's news. Headline, US sets condition for India to buy Russian oil. New Delhi should either abide by the G7 price cap, which is the oil price cap, which is coming up. Apparently it's going to be enacted next month, or is the alternative option, or refrain from using Western insurance and shipping services. Well, Western insurance and shipping services dominate.
Right.
There's like 3 major insurance companies, and they're all Western.
That's blackmail, basically.
That is blackmail. Washington's given its blessing to India to keep buying as much Russian oil as it wishes, even at prices exceeding the oil cap. but only if it refrains from using our insurance companies. And you know what will happen then? Here's a prediction for you. Oops, a major oil cargo, supercargo shipping is going to be on its way to India and it's going to sink. It's going to be, I don't know what happened. Oops. And then the insurance, there was no insurance. And then the insurance rates for India will go up exorbitantly anyway, so they may as well abide by the price cap. That kind of shit's going to start happening next year. I think that's why this is accelerating. He's got 12 countries, including those 4 major oil and gas producers, who are like, okay, knocking on the door of BRICS right now. Why BRICS announced we need a reserve currency. Like, they talked about it for a decade, but like, guys, time's pressing and the US is going insane on everyone. They're going to do all kinds of things. If they did that Nord Stream to Germany, what are they going to do to us?
Well, if the US continues with this kind of blackmail against these countries, they're going to do exactly what they claim Russia did by invading Ukraine, i.e. they strengthened NATO, right? Strengthened the resolve and the kind of camaraderie, or the whatever term they used for NATO, right? They strengthened NATO.